So, once again, welcome to Winter Storytelling at Travelers Rest. We have just a couple more weeks of storytelling, but I want to remind folks that 2026 will be full of new events, exhibits, and opportunities to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Travelers Rest. As we mark this anniversary, let's begin by acknowledging that we are gathered today on the homeland of the Séliš Bay people, at a place they have called Timsumkli since time immemorial. Their example as the original stewards of this land guides our work today. We're committed to respectfully sharing the history and contemporary culture of the indigenous people who lived and traveled through the ancient crossroads on this land. We learn from many indigenous artists, elders, and organizations, and we invite you to learn from and support them as well. I just realized that it's been a couple of weeks since I've introduced myself, so for folks who don't know me, my name is Molly Stockdale, and I'm the Executive Director of Travelers Rest Connection. The Connection is the nonprofit partner, or the friends group, for Travelers Rest State Park. And we're also celebrating 25 years because the two organizations really grew up together. And we hope that you'll join us for lots of fun celebrations in 2026. I want to say thank you to the folks who make winter storytelling possible. That includes the members of Travelers Rest Connection, all of those friends of the park, as well as some corporate supporters. Parkside Credit Union and First Security Bank are both sponsors for this year. And Montana Public Radio provides some advertising for us. And I also want to thank MCAT, Missoula's Community Media Resource, which provided a media assistance grant to record today's session and share it over Zoom. For our folks on Zoom, it is helpful if you keep yourself muted and your video off during the presentation. If you have questions for our speaker, please type them into the chat box, and we'll monitor that for questions or any technical difficulties you might have. For folks in the room, if you have questions, our speakers ask that we hold them to the end, but I'll definitely give you a chance to ask questions then. Our speaker today is Lee Silliman. Lee is a retired educator and museum professional living in Missoula. He was a Montana secondary level physics, chemistry, and math instructor for 43 years, which is so much science for an art guy. Lee has also been a part-time photo archivist for a county museum for 26 years, where he was. Since early childhood, he has nurtured a strong interest in the art and history of the 19th century American West. Lee has assembled and circulated numerous exhibits that have been displayed in more than 90 venues, including right in this room, throughout Montana and 10 other states since 1988. Lee's interest in photography, calligraphy, and Western Americana art and history has spawned lots of articles on those subjects, plus 6 books that he's edited and published. He's presented at many conferences, taught numerous workshops, and led educational group tours. He holds a BS and MS degrees from the University of Illinois, is married to the lovely Nancy, who is joining us via Zoom today. Hi, Nancy. And 2 daughters. So please help me welcome Lee Silliman.
Thank you very much for that introduction. This is the second time I've stood in front of folks in this room instead of being out there in the audience. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And putting in a plug for what Molly suggested, not only have I had, I believe, 2 exhibits, we have another one coming for this summer, Ursus horribilis, antique engravings of the American grizzly bear. So be sure you come here this summer. These will be gone, and so the next show will be about 40-some antique prints of the American grizzly bear from around, I believe, 1828 to 1935-ish or whatever. I need to give you several caveats. First of all, I went to Portland from last Friday through this past Wednesday, had a wonderful time getting a grandson married, and I came home with a cold, and a little sore throat, so you're going to have to bear with me in case my throat runs dry and I have to grab some drinks. And I want to give you another caveat. I am not a Lewis and Clark specialist. I know some friends who know Lewis and Clark 10 times or 20 or 100 times better than I do. I'm kind of a generalist. I've studied the art and history of the American West and all of its manifestations. And so I want to tell you why I'm standing in front of you right now. The university book, or the university, I forget the name, the university women's book sale. Help me, Molly.
Association of University Women.
That's it.
That's the one.
They had a book sale, which we always go to. Can you all hear me? I'm using my teacher voice. Yes. Oh, I got to point out, Steve here, instead of me grading him as one of my former students, he gets to grade me when I'm done, okay? And I see some other friends out there. So anyway, my wife and I always go to these book sales. And this book was for sale. I think I paid around $20 for it. When it came out about 20 years ago, it was a $43 book. And I started looking through it, and it had a number of pictures of famous artists that I love, Charlie Russell, Carl Bodmer, Alfred Jacob Miller, and so on, as well as some modern pictures. And it had quotations of the Lewis and Clark expedition relating to the picture. I stole the idea, okay? Now, I did modify it. I did put the Lee Silliman stamp on it. There are a number of modern pictures in here, and I didn't want to violate copyright. And I have so many pictures that I know in my repertoire. So every picture you see, except one, is a historic picture from the past by the artists I've mentioned and others. And they're copyright free. I didn't want to be violating copyrights, and I wanted to put my own stamp on it. And furthermore, I cooked up some more slides, instances in the events that were not in the book. So I'm going to pass this around. I'm going to start over here. If you go across the first row and then to the next row and back over, you can look at this and see how I got the idea. So if this is something you would like to, I'm sure you could buy that on the used book market, ABE Books or Amazon or eBay or whatever. And if you wanted to get more into that subject, there's the take down the author's name and the title. So one more caveat. I first started typing in some of the comments that were relating to the picture, and I did that for a few slides, and then I stopped doing it. I'm going to be reading, as Molly acknowledged to me a few minutes ago, reading the Lewis and Clark journals, and I've got mostly their original spellings and their original phraseology. It's hard to read, right, Molly?
It's terrible. Their spelling is atrocious.
Yeah, so if I stumble, it's all the fault of Lewis and Clark, not me, okay? I'm going to do a couple of things. I think I've got about 70-some slides, and I don't want to bore you too much or get you too antsy for sitting too long. So I want you to know these are all in chronological order. I've made that for sure, and I'm not going to give the names of them. It's going to vary between Lewis and Clark and the members. If you'd like to know who said exactly what, you can come up and I can tell you. But in order for efficiency, just trust it was either the leaders or some of their members. So we'll get it going here, and hopefully the technology. I'm going to read the first few slides, and then after that, you got to listen. The journals of the Lewis and Clark expedition members offer us a bounty of word descriptions. And let's take a look at this very first quote here by Ordway. He said, "I now embrace the opportunity of writing to you once more to let you know where I am and where I am going. I am well, thank God, and in high spirits. I am now on the expedition to the westward with Captain Lewis and Captain Clark, who were appointed by the President of the United States to go on an expedition through the interior parts of North America. We are to ascend the Missouri River with a boat as far as it is navigable, and then go by land to the Western Ocean if nothing prevents." How about that for a summation by one of the members of what they're going to do? I thought that was a very good summation. So I'm going to mention a few of the, here's some portraits of the two leaders that I have found. That particular coat was given to Lewis by Native Americans, and that's what was depicted there. You all know Sacagawea. There's various pronunciations. That's the way I grew up pronouncing it. It says, the wife of Charbonneau, our interpreter, we find reconciles all the Indians as to our friendly intentions. A woman with a party of men is a token of peace. I think that makes her almost as important as Lewis and Clark themselves. They're obviously the leaders who made all the critical decisions. But the fact that she, mostly by chance, ended up on the expedition guaranteed their safety. I saw a video one time from, I believe, the Assiniboine, or one of the tribes in northeastern Montana, where they were saying to themselves, there's a woman there coming up the river. That can't be a war party. I've studied James Willard Schultz, who wrote about 30 or 40 books on the Blackfeet, and there was only one. You can go across, it's okay. There was only one Blackfoot woman that I recall who was a warrior. So a woman with a child, she gave birth further on in the trip, but a woman and eventually with a child, that could not be a war party. So they were probably not attacked because of her. So I think her importance ranks third, right behind Lewis and Clark. Rolling on. Another important member, I think, was York, who was, as we know, an African-American slave, and he provided valuable hunting and just general labor amongst all the men. He was like a co-equal to all the other members of the expedition. And so we've got a picture of him. And let's take a look. I think this is the last one I want to specify, is Drewlard. He was a hunter who was an excellent man. I mean, can you imagine the need for meat for that large group of people, that he had to constantly be out on the hunt to bring in a deer? And here this quote talks about how he killed 3 deer that he brought in with him. That's the only modern picture I have. I couldn't find an antique picture of Drewlard, so you're going to have to forgive me. But the rest are really neat. Okay. Here are the boats that they took. There's a drawing in the upper left. They could row it, and they could also put a sail, and they could also pole it along. I'll tell you, it must not be very fun to push a boat upstream on the Missouri River by muscle power. Steamboats came onto the scene in the 1830s, but in the 08s, that Lewis and Clark were there. Pushing a boat upstream like that was really, really a task. And so I want you to know how laborious it was. And here we are at an encampment. Here we have the leisure to reflect on our situation and the nature of our engagements. The government has projected that we undertake this for the benefit and expense of the Union. Of course, they have high expectations. They were meeting Indian people, of course, all along the way. They were given instructions to try to make peace with them. And here is an Osage. Clark said, several Indians who informed me that the Sacs had lately crossed to war against the Osage Nation. So there is a picture of an Osage. And Patrick Gass said, the Osage Nation of Indians live about 200 miles upriver. They are of a large size and well-proportioned and a very warlike people. Our arms and ammunition are all inspected here and found in good order. I would hazard to guess that several hundred Indian tribes could probably have made a pretty serious attack on the Lewis and Clark expedition. They would have suffered losses, but a party of, it varied. Molly helped me. On the way up, 33.
By the time they got here, 33, but on the way to Fort Mandan, there were about an extra 5 or 6.
Right.
More.
So I think an Indian party could have handled them. It had been a deadly battle, but it could have been accomplished. So they were always on guard, even though they wanted to have peace with everyone. I like this picture. by Carl Bodmer. It shows the snags. Those were somewhat of a hazard because you had to go around them, but even more hazardous were what are called the sawyers, S-A-W-Y-E-R-S. And they were a log that jammed into the current facing upstream, and the upper part of it would be just below the water line. So what happens when your boat comes along, whether it's a steamboat or a keel boat? Right through the hull. There are, I don't know the exact number, but probably the Missouri River sank 50 or more steamboats in the steamboat era. So these impediments were really dangerous. Clark was saying here on this one, a large sandbar in the middle. It passed a very bad place. We struck it, and we turned the boat within 6 inches of a large sawyer, meaning, one of those slightly underwater killers. So it was a very dangerous passage because of all of these logs that are swept down. When you can see them, you can go around them. But the sawyers were the invisible killers. You had to always be careful. Here is an island, Nottoway Island. Let's see, we proceeded on the north side of an island called Nottoway Island. It is well timbered, and we camped on the north side of it. The hunters killed one deer here, but they didn't join us for the night. So apparently, sometimes they would send Drewlard and other hunters out, and maybe they'd be gone overnight and come back in the morning with the meat before they took off. I think that is the implication of that quote. Here we are with Clark saying, at this season of the year, all the Indians in this quarter are on the plains hunting the buffalo. The prairies being on fire in the direction of the village induced the belief that the natives have returned to get some corn. I like to mention there the fact that the Indians set fires purposefully very frequently throughout the West, throughout the plains and the forested areas. Native people had a 10,000-year understanding of the role of fire. And when you think that when the Euro-Americans came into the West, that it seemed like a pretty virginal land, well, the Native people have been selectively burning the grasses to let new grass come up, and the forests to keep things in a balance. So that's just a lesson that I think is good to bring to your attention, that Native people for thousands of years had purposefully and carefully planned use of fire in their understanding of the continent. A teepee scene here, talking about the Sioux camps. I have a handsome conical form covered with buffalo robes, painted different colors, and all arranged around the center of the village. Prairie dogs. This morning, being clear, we set off on our hunter's return, having killed an animal that they brought with them called a prairie dog. This is Joseph Whitehorse's house. They had seen a large number of them, and they had their habitations laying together. So we halted in Captain Lewis to go hunt for these animals, and they found them, and they resemble a small dog, and they live in holes which is covered with compact clay and are regularly spaced. And I don't think he mentioned how they chirped a lot, if you've ever seen a prairie dog house. Wolves. Patrick Gass. I went out with one of our men who had killed a buffalo and left with one of the men, and we left his hat to keep off the vermin and the beasts of prey. Apparently they were going to leave it and come back and butcher it. But when we came to the place, we found that the wolves had devoured the carcass and had carried off the hat. Here we found a white wolf dead, supposed to have been killed in a contest with the buffalo. Isn't that pretty neat how I found a picture of the white wolves, and one of them was probably killed by the buffalo. Couldn't have asked for a better illustration, could you? Here comes a true story about one of their members who was lost. Apparently it was George Shannon. He nearly starved to death. He was lost for 12 days without anything to eat but grapes and a rabbit, which he killed with a stick. Supposing the boats were lagging behind him or had gone ahead of him, he rushed further ahead. And finally he realized they were probably behind him, and then they finally caught up with him. But that is a Alfred Jacob Miller painting of another true incident that he experienced. You don't want to get lost on the prairie out by yourself in the 18aughts or 30s or 40s, because you're probably going to be dead meat if the Indians catch you. So it was a very dangerous circumstance for that man for 12 days. Vast herds of buffalo. This is Lewis. The country broken on the border of the river about a mile, and when the level plains commenced and extended as far as the eye could reach, there were extensive plains that had lately been burnt, probably by the Indians, and the grass had sprung up and was about 3 inches high. Vast herds of buffalo, deer, and elk and antelope were feeding in every direction as far as the eye of the observer could reach. And Clark, I ascended to the high country, and from an eminence I had a view of the plains for a great distance. From this eminence I had a view of the great number of buffalo, of a greater number of buffalo than I had ever seen before at one time. I must have seen near 20,000 of those animals feeding on this plain. That's impressive. Can you imagine what that must have been like to have seen buffalo to the horizon? Pronghorn antelope. We found antelope extremely shy and watchful, inasmuch as we had been unable to get a shot at them. And they generally select a very elevated point in the neighborhood, and they watch carefully and are extremely quick of sight and sense of smelling. It's almost impossible to approach them within gunshot, and they will frequently discover and flee from you at a distance of 3 miles. And he finishes up by saying, we were witnessing the agility and superior fleetness of the animal, which to me was really astonishing. Yeah, I've seen antelope take off. I lived in Deer Lodge for 37 years, and not too far out from town toward the mountains, you could often see antelope, and occasionally they would flee, and it's just amazing how fast. And it's not like they don't hop like deer. They're just like they were elevated and were flying practically. I'm sure some of you folks have seen it yourself. Any antelope hunters out here? You? Okay, next slide. Peace pipes. The great chief then arose and spoke to the same purpose, and with solemnity he took up the piece of pipe and pointed it to the heavens, the 4 quarters, and the earth. And he made a dissertation and presented them to us, and we smoked it. So it's good. It was good manners of them to reciprocate by smoking the pipe of peace with them. I like this slide. It's the bull boat. On our return, we crossed from the island to the boat, and with two native women in a buffalo skin stretched on a frame of boughs woven together like a crate or a basket. You actually have one here that you've had on display. Oh, it's out there, so you be sure to see it. It's really a clever way of making a watertight small craft. I would wonder how, without a keel, it must be a little difficult to paddle in a given direction. But anyway, it served their needs. Probably a lot easier to make than a dugout canoe. I'm glad I don't ever had to make a dugout canoe. The Mandan lodges. In a circle the size suited to the dimensions of the lodge, they set up 16 fork posts, 5 to 6 feet high, lay poles from one fork to another, and against these poles they lean other poles slanting from the ground. And the whole is then covered with willow branches except the chimney. And on the willow branches they lay grass, and then lastly clay. These are above ground structures. Oops, help me. Jesse. Whoops, there we go. Got to be careful. Don't want to press the wrong button. Tell you what, I use my laser and I won't press the wrong button. So these are above ground, and yet they have all the attributes of being below ground, having so much earth around them. They were cool in the summer and warmer in the winter. Very, very clever. Yes?
What does that description sentence mean?
The interior of the hut of a Mandan chief by Carl Bodmer. Yeah. Yep. I'll put in a plug for Carl Bodmer. I've got 3 of his books here. Although I'm a Charlie Russell fan, I really have the utmost respect for Carl Bodmer. He came up the Missouri River in the 1832, 33, 34 era, and he painted the native people in a way that had never been done before or since. His accuracy of all the details that he painted was so good. It was the equivalent of photography, what it could have done. Native people respect to this day the fidelity and the honor and the care that Carl Bodmer did of Native people. So I've got all these books up here by these 3 artists, Bodmer, Catlin, and Miller, and come up and look at them afterwards. So they were very warm. They met 2 trappers. Having proceeded 2 miles, we met a couple of Frenchmen in a canoe. They were not the first people, Westerners to go up to the Missouri River country. If you read the Canadian history, Canadians were going across the continent to the Pacific Ocean. There were sailing ships that were going to the west coast. So although they were American pioneers up the river, there were English and French people that had preceded them. In fact, I think I just bought a book a year or 2 ago about some of those explorers previous to Lewis and Clark. But anyway, let's see. These men had met with a party of Mandans who had robbed them of their arms, ammunition, and some fur, and they were going down the river, but meeting us, they went back in hopes of recovering their property. I don't know anything about them. Molly or anyone? Does anybody know whether those men, they probably didn't get their stuff back. I can't imagine 2 men going back to a tribe of Indians saying, give us our stuff back. I don't think that would have worked. Scaffold burial. These Indians do not bury their deceased as other nations living on the Missouri. The manner in which they treat them is by placing them on a high scaffold wrapped up in buffalo robes. We saw several of their deceased placed on scaffolds and was informed of it being their custom. I think one of the many sad things about our history is I've read stories of where white people would come upon some of these and try to steal some of the clothing or the implements that were buried with them. Yes. On the right, it says the scaffold of the Sioux chief, and on the left, it says the Assiniboine. Yeah. Mandan village. At 7 o'clock, we came to the first village of the Mandan Nation, 50 to 60 lodges. They are stout, well-made men, and they have the lightest color Indians that we ever saw. This could have been one of the, there were theories as to whether some people had come thousands of years ago from Europe and had, engendered lighter skin unions with some of the native people. That idea has been pretty much debunked. There just were some lighter-skinned Indians and some darker-skinned Indians. A Charlie Russell picture. I smoked with him and gave this chief a dollar of the American coin as a medal, which he was much pleased. We presented him with a certificate of sincerity and good conduct. After the council, we gave the presents with much ceremony, and medals on the chiefs we intended to make for each one. And we gave them coats, hats, and flags, and 1 grand chief to each nation to whom we gave medals with the president's likeness. So they were using artifacts that they had brought with them to give as presents, because quite often the native people were giving them presents. And throughout most of the world, you want to exchange items rather than be only a taker. So they came prepared, which was good. This is one of my favorite Charlie Russell pictures, Buffalo Hunt number 39. The original is owned by the Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth, Texas, and I've had the pleasure of seeing it. I think it's one of Charlie Russell's finest paintings, or at least in the top 10 in my own book. And it shows a buffalo hunt, and they went out to hunt buffalo with the Indians. They, meaning the Indians, killed 30 or 40, and we killed 11. They shoot them with bows and arrows and have their horses so trained that they will advance very near and suddenly wheel and fly off in case the wounded buffalo attempts an attack. Let me elaborate on that. First of all, you might think that guns were superior to bows and arrows. At that time, flintlock rifles were very difficult to reload. So if you're on a horse and you fire your flintlock, that's about one shot. Maybe you can get another one in the next couple of minutes. The Indians might have had 6 or 7 or 10 or a dozen arrows in their quiver and could probably shoot 3, 4, 5, or 6 buffalo in a run. So they had a very good system worked out. They would try to shoot them right behind the forelegs into the lung and through the rib cage into the lungs. That wouldn't kill them right away. It was just enough for them to bleed, and eventually they would die maybe a half a mile or a few hundred yards or a mile or whatever on. Yes?
Do you think that's Square Butte in the background?
Yes, it probably is Montana Square Butte. Yep. Which I had the pleasure of living by for 5 years. My first 5 years in Montana were in Denton, Montana, Fergus County. And we could always look out and see Square Butte and Round Butte, which were figures that Charlie Russell often put in the back of his pictures. Wintertime. Some of the natives came to our fort bringing one of their nation that was frostbitten. They told the officers that they had run out on the 9th to hunt and had this Indian, but the weather was so cold and gave out, and they were forced to leave him behind. And they went out and brought him back, and it says they finally found him, the men that went back. His feet were very much bitten by the frost, but at least his life was spared. I don't think that happened too often, but you can imagine the winters were much, much colder in the 1800s than we're experiencing now. I mean, we're not even having winter now, it seems. I've shoveled my sidewalk about 1/2 inch once this winter. The 1800s were much more severe. Yellowstone National Park had snow on the mountains thousands of feet below the summits almost the entire year. It was often called the Never Summer Land. So historically, the 1800s were a very severe century for weather. The Ponca Indians, let's see, they have no idea of exclusive possession of soil. They boasted 700 warriors, and let's see, then they were hit by the smallpox, which reduced their numbers to 300, and they burnt their village and went on. Several things about that. First of all, no native tribe that I've ever read about, especially in the West, which is where I focused on, had the idea of land ownership like the Judeo-Christian, Euro-American mindset had. To them, the whole world was something for all of us to use and utilize, not to own. I think the closest you could come to ownership was maybe their teepee and their horses. And I've even read in many tribes, the wife was the owner of the teepee. She could kick the man out. Did that pick up on the mic? The other thing is smallpox. As you're probably aware, Europeans brought diseases with them that had ravaged European populations for thousands of years. And so the survivors had some immunity especially to smallpox, cholera, and the bubonic plague and others, that in Europe were killing millions and millions. When they come to the Americas, Native people had no antibodies or resistance to them. There is an estimate that up to 90% of Native people in the 1800s died from disease as opposed to warfare with white people. So it was a terrible, terrible scourge. It probably, that and the disappearance of the buffalo were the two death knells to Native populations. Trapper's Bride. This is too long. This is about. I couldn't find a picture of a childbirth situation. So yeah, that's okay. So we've got a picture here of a Trapper's Bride. This was very common. In the early decades of the 1800s, relatively few white women were coming west with the fur traders and the explorers and so on. The white people very often married Native people, and this was very, very common, and had children, which we called mixed bloods. So anyway, Charbonneau and Sacagawea were basically of that union. It was very, very common. So Sacagawea was ready to give birth, and it said, Mr. Jerome informed me that he had frequently administered a small portion of a rattlesnake, and that of hastening the birth of the child. And so that's what they did. They gave him a potion of ground up rattlesnake. And later on in the quote here, whether this medicine was truly the cause I shall not undertake to determine. But, pardon me, I was informed that she had not taken it more than 10 minutes before she had brought forth perhaps this remedy may be worthy of future experiments. So in other words, it hastened the birth of Pomp. I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. The Mandan Lodge. This is a really neat story. This is a famous painting by Charlie Russell that I believe is at the Montana Historical Society. Some foolish young men of this nation, meaning a Native person, had informed him that there was a black man in the party, and they wished to know if it was true. The Negro was brought up, and Burgoyne was astonished, apparently that was the Native person, and examined him closely, spit on his hand and rubbed it in order to see if it was paint and would rub off. And of course, it didn't rub off, and they were very amazed. I mean, they thought he was very, very special. To the white culture, this man was at the bottom of the social ladder, whereas to Native people, he was strong and friendly and vigorous and so different. They gave him a lot of respect. You brought a really good presenter on about York, didn't you, last year?
Hassan Davis. How many people came to see Hassan Davis?
How many saw that? I did. It was fantastic.
He's a living historian who portrays York. He does a fantastic job.
Right. The Assiniboines. Let's see. Okay, the principal inducement of the British fur companies for continuing their establishment on the Assiniboine River is the buffalo meat and grease they procure from the Assiniboines. In other words, although this is not a buffalo shot, it is of the Assiniboines. One of the really neat foods was to take buffalo meat and grease and fat and berries and grind it up together and put it into like a hermetically sealed leather pouch, and it would last for months and months, and it was like a good preserved food that you could use on journeys. That's an interesting picture. Native people rarely made war on the grizzly bear. They revered the grizzly bear. I could talk to you for an hour on that. In fact, I have a lecture on the grizzly bear. I am going to give the grizzly bear lecture at Five Valleys Audubon in May, which is on the second Monday of every month in the Science Building. What's the name of it? Steve, help me. Anyway, Interdisciplinary Sciences Building, next to the big building that's under construction there, where Arthur and Mount meet. Anyway, I will be giving the grizzly bear history lecture to the Five Valleys Audubon on the second Monday of May. Anyway, moving on. The Lodge of the Assiniboines Chiefs. We're going to skip that. I'm a little bit out of sync here. Oh, more bison. Again, he says, they were so tame. There were nearly 1,000 of them, and we could go within 100 yards in open view of them before they would run off, and then a short distance they would stop. When you're a big 1,000 to 2,000 pound animal, I don't think you have to take alarm too quickly at these bipeds that are coming around. Okay, the confluence of the Yellowstone and Missouri. I ascended the hills from whence, this is Lewis, I ascended the hills from whence I had a most pleasing view of the country, meaning the confluence of the Missouri and the Yellowstone, particularly of the wide and fertile valleys formed by the Missouri and Yellowstone rivers, which occasionally, unmasked by the wood on their borders, disclose their meanderings for many miles. And these are delightful tracts of the country. I think that's a really beautiful view by Carl Bodmer. Bighorn sheep. Now, there's some confusion. They call bighorn sheep goats and goats bighorn sheep. There's kind of a confusion here. These animals, meaning the bighorn sheep, wrote William Clark, run and skipped about with great ease on this declivity and appeared to prefer it to the level bottoms of the plain. These animals are very common to be found in the Rocky Mountains, according to Sacagawea. This was a new species that did not inhabit, east of the Mississippi. So this was a new animal for them to discover. And, there were many of them. We associate them with the mountains today, but I don't know how many of you know, but they were a plains animal, and especially in the Missouri River breaks and some of the other river country that had these bluff, steep terrain. So they encountered them not in the mountains, but out in the plains. Just like the grizzly bears inhabited the plains in historic times. Beaver? Let's see. On our way this evening, we also shot 3 beaver along the shore. The flesh of the beaver is esteemed a delicacy among us. I think the tail a most delicious morsel, and when boiled, it resembles in flavor the fresh tongues and rounds of the codfish, and is sufficiently large to afford a plentiful meal for 2 men. I've never had beaver tail, but it's supposedly a delicacy. Anybody out there ever eat beaver tail? And reporting on the number of beaver was significant because this was, before the massive invasion of the West for beaver pelts. They estimate there were millions and millions of beaver, and now we're down to like a couple, maybe 100, less than 100,000. But they are coming back. And I'm going to skip through these. I've got several here relating to grizzly bears. Clark and Drewler killed an enormous grizzly bear with some effort. Clark described it as, quote, a very large and terrible-looking animal, which we found very hard to kill. We shot 10 balls into him before we killed him. They had told the Indians that with our guns, we're not afraid of bears. And they were wondering why the Indians, who called the grizzly bear the white bear, because of the light reflections off of the coats of grizzly bears, they were wondering why the Plains Indians were telling them to watch out for the grizzly bears because, we have rifles that are very powerful. Well, they soon found out that, that the grizzly bear is a different animal. For example, this one, let's see, McNeil was attacked by a white bear. His horse threw him so near the bear that he did not have time to shoot, but he drew his gun, and he struck the bear across the head and broke off the breech of his gun. It stunned the bear so that he had time to climb a sapling, and the bear kept him up in the tree for 3 hours. That'll teach you to knock a grizzly bear in the head. And here's another one. This happened to, is it Clark or Lewis? I don't have it written here. One of them. They fired at a grizzly bear, and the bear charged him, and he ran 80 yards and found that the bear was gaining on him, and I ran into the water, and the idea struck me to get into the water at such a depth that I could stand, and he would be obliged to swim, and in that way I could defend myself with my spittoon. And that's what he did. He ran into the river, and I think I got a picture of that. No, I don't. He stood off the bear in the river, and the bear got in the river a little bit and then turned around. They've reenacted that. The grizzly are hard to die. This bear, being so hard to die, rather intimidates us all. They're learning. I must confess that I do not like the gentleman and had rather fight 2 Indians than 1 bear. There is no other chance to conquer them but by a single shot, shooting them through their brains. Sioux and Blackfeet meet. Even though this is the Sioux and the Blackfeet, he met a war party of Minataris who had attacked the Blackfeet, and in consequence of their having killed one of their principal warriors the previous autumn. This was kind of one of the endemic problems among tribes, revenge killing back and forth, and so quite often there was peace between tribes, but if there was a killing of one, then a cycle of revenge killing would ensue until it petered out. The river cliffs, the stone walls, the hills and river cliffs we pass by today exhibit a most romantic appearance. The bluffs of the river rise to the height of from 200 to 300 feet. In most places are nearly perpendicular, of white sandstone. And they're worn into 1,000 grotesque figures, which with the help of a little imagination and an oblique view at a distance are made to represent the elegant ranges of lofty freestone buildings, having their parapets well stocked with statuary. The columns of various sculpture, both grooved and plain, are also seen supporting long galleries on the fronts of those buildings. I've floated the Missouri River twice. How many out here have floated the Missouri River? I bet a few of you. It's really fantastic to see the sandstone formations. Carl Bodmer painted some really beautiful pictures of that scenery. For example, the hills and river cliffs this day exhibit a most romantic appearance. In many places of this day march, we observed on either side of the mountains extraordinary walls of black sediment stone which appear to lie regularly placed on one side or the other. Some of them rise to a height of 100 feet. That's a very famous landmark on the Missouri River. The first glimpse. To the south, we saw a range of lofty mountains that were partially covered with snow. Behind these mountains and at a great distance, a second and more lofty range of mountains appeared to stretch across the country in the same direction. In other words, where the snowy tops were lost themselves beneath the horizon. The last range was perfectly covered with snow. It's estimated that they said this when they were seeing the Highwood Mountains. And when you look past the Highwood Mountains, you see the front range of the Rockies. So it's like, okay, get ready. The little mountain range you're seeing called the Highwoods is just a small sample of the Bitterroots and the mountains you're going to have to be surmounting heading westward. But before they have to tackle that, they come to the Great Falls of the Missouri. We saw the spray raise above the plain like a column of smoke, and I presume by the wind. At this point, it soon began to make a roaring sound too tremendous to be mistaken for any cause short of the Great Falls of the Missouri River. And of course, you probably know that it's been dammed up now. It doesn't look like that. I've got several other pictures of the same event. And here's one that Black Eagle Falls. Below this falls, at a little distance, a beautiful little island, well timbered, is situated about in the middle of the river. In this island, on a cottonwood tree, an eagle has placed her nest. A more inaccessible spot, I believe, she could not have found, for neither man nor beast could pass through these gulfs which separate her little domain from the shores. Isn't that beautiful writing? And here's another picture of the Great Falls. What I like is the idea. I thought that if a skillful painter had been asked to make a beautiful cascade, he would most probably have presented the precise image of this one. And I'm going to skip over a quote. I believe it was Clark who said something about, wouldn't it be neat if we could get some painters here to try to render this and show it to the people back east. I had not, let's see, this is Lewis. I had not proceeded more than 300 yards from the burrow of this tiger cat, meaning a mountain lion, when 3 buffalo bulls, which were feeding with a large herd half a mile on my left, separated from the herd and ran full speed toward me. I thought at least to get some amusement and alter my direction to meet them. When they arrived about 100 yards, they came to a halt, took a good look at me, and then retreated. I had this happen to me in Yellowstone National Park. I was out in the backcountry, which I loved to do for many years. And one time a bison bull that was about 500 yards away peered away from the herd. And it wasn't running at us, but it just kept coming closer and closer to us. And we didn't have any trees around us. And I was nervous, but finally it stopped and decided to go do something else. No trees. Sacagawea at the Sulphur Spring. Let's see. The wife of our interpreter had been dangerously ill, but she now has found relief from the water of the Sulphur Spring. We suspect the iron as the color of the hills and the bluffs that were in the water that they gave credit to curing her from her temporary malady. Now, this is a poor illustration of their portage if you've seen any Lewis and Clark paintings. They had big logs and they had bigger boats, but this is the best I could come up with, the portage. It's no fun portaging. I've done it. And to think all the baggage and the big boats they had to move, I think it was, correct me, Molly, 18 miles around the Great Falls. I mean, how would you like, our portage was maybe a couple hundred yards. How would you like to carry all that stuff 18 miles? No, thanks. A torrent came rolling down this creek with irresistible force, driving rocks and mud and everything before it. Captain Clark fortunately discovered it a moment before it reached them, and seizing his gun and pouch with his left hand, got himself up on a steep bluff and shoved the Indian woman before him with her child. They would have perished if he hadn't seen it just in time. It was basically like a flash flood. I've seen videos on YouTube. I mean, it can come down at 20 or 30 miles an hour down a stream bed. You better not be in a stream bed when one of those is heading. Closest I ever came to a flash flood, I was camping in Big Bend National Park, and I remember the afternoon when it was dry, there was an arroyo about as wide as this room, and I was camped a couple hundred yards away, and a cloudburst happened, And it didn't come to my camp. I wasn't dumb enough to camp in an arroyo, but I went over to it, and it was 2 or 3 feet deep, and it was going like 10 miles an hour, and there were waves this high on it. And it was a dry arroyo an hour or two before. So they're really dangerous. Gates of the mountain. It's talking about the river's forced its way through this body of solid rock for a distance of 5 1/4 miles. The river appears to have formed its passage in a channel of only 150 yards. It is deep and steep from side to side. How many of you have taken the boat at Gates of the Mountain? Yeah, if you haven't, you got to put that on your bucket list. It's really neat. And I think that's a beautiful rendition of it. Here we are at the Three Forks. Which way do you go? It was a delightful place, and it exceeded anything we had previously seen. We expected to have found the Snake Nation of Indians here, but they were gone, and now expected they've gone over to the mountains to the Columbia River to fish. So she says, go that way. And as you probably know, she did. She was in her home territory. You know, she was a Shoshone woman who had been kidnapped with another woman and taken down to the Dakotas, where Charbonneau had made her his wife, bought her or whatever induced him. The other woman who had been captured had escaped and gotten back, and Sacagawea met her, as you probably know, and we'll see this in a few minutes. Salmon leap. On my return to my lodge, an Indian called me to his bower and gave me a small morsel of the flesh of the antelope and a piece of salmon, both of which I ate with very good relish. This was the first salmon I had seen and perfectly convinced me that we were now on the waters of the Pacific Ocean. So here they are, the reunion. Shortly after Captain Clark arrived with the interpreter Charbonneau and the Indian woman, who proved to be the sister of the chief Cameowaite, the meaning of these people was really affecting, particularly between Sacagawea and an Indian woman, who that Indian woman was the other lady, that young girl that she was kidnapped with, who had been taken prisoner at the same time with her and who had escaped from the Minataris. I see that it's 11 o'clock, and I think what I'm going to do is, I don't have time to do another pile of pictures. So I'd like to give you time. You're catching the idea, aren't you? I'd like to kind of go through the pictures, and I won't stop and read their journals. You know, buy that book or get it from a library. And let's just see that the pictures that I've garnered that illustrate the Lewis and Clark expedition. There they are, meeting the Indians at Ross's Hole, where they were able to acquire horses to then go over the Bitterroot Mountains, coming back up and going over Lolo Pass, so right here where we were. So this is kind of describing our circumstance here. It was not fun. Molly, what month was that?
September.
September. Deep snow as they went up into the mountains in September. Not anymore. They saw mountain goats. They saw on the Columbia River the native people drying the salmon, which were very, very plentiful, in the millions and millions of salmon. They came to Celilo Falls, which was an impediment. Not anymore because it's drowned underneath Lake Bonneville. And they found the Indians fishing. Kettle Falls is now inundated. And the Cascades of the Columbia was also inundated by one of the dams. And I think this is a really beautiful picture showing how everywhere along the Columbia they were able to fish, and the tributaries when they return. They spawn up in the rivulets, swim downstream, out into the ocean, live for a few years, and then come back up to their natal stream and spawn and then die. Flatheads, there's a quote here. This was done to small children. A board was placed against their head to kind of shape it in a steeper fashion because it was considered by some tribes to be a mark of beauty. And they saw lots of bird life. And of course, they went by Mount Hood, which I just saw this is Saturday. On Wednesday, I saw Mount Hood from out my airplane window. It's really a grand mountain. Another picture of Mount Hood by Albert Bierstadt. Finally, they get to the ocean, and so they've accomplished their goal. Then they have to spend time living among the Clatsop Indians, building Fort Clatsop, and getting to know them, and moving on and on. They visited them. They admired their boats. I've got a quote in here about they can't believe these huge boats that are seaworthy, that can carry like a dozen or 18 people and go through huge waves that Clark would never, ever attempt with any of the boats he'd been in. This is it's not a mountain lion. Bobcat, right? Lynx. They saw one of those, got some skins. They brought a lot back with them. Here they are from Clatsop. Then on the way back, they had a deadly encounter with the Blackfeet. They were some young Blackfeet attempted to steal some of their guns, which were very, very few and far between at that time, and it allowed them to make effective warfare on their neighbors. So stealing a gun was a very, very astute thing for a young Blackfoot warrior to do. Unfortunately, it turned out not to work very well for him. 2 of them were killed, and Lewis had to make a fast exit down the Missouri River and meet Clark at the confluence. Down on the Yellowstone River, they got their horses all stolen, and they had to finish going down the river to the confluence in their canoes. Well, I could go on and on and on. There's so much to the Lewis and Clark expedition, but it's 11 o'clock, a little bit after. You can grab a drink. And I'm not a Lewis and Clark expert, but I'd love to take any questions.
I just have a comment to make. I saw that you had, I forgot the name of the hills. Those hills out north of, between Helena and Great Falls.
Gates of the Mountains?
No.
The Highwoods? Yes.
It's hills. Highwoods. The first time I ever had a hunting license, it was for the Highwoods. And I was married. My husband has since been deceased. However, a lot of other people must have gone there for the first time too, because we went bumper to bumper all the way. And we parked, we hiked. People, I don't know who they were, what they were shooting, but we began to wonder who they were shooting.
It's interesting you mentioned that. That was either my first or second backpacking trip with my wife into the Highwoods. And it was in September, and I didn't count on it getting very cold. We had gone up, of course, in elevation, and the temperature drops the higher up you get. And I remember freezing the whole night because I had an air mattress with no foam in it, and I was cold the whole night. I don't think I slept more than an hour. So that's my Highwood example. Any more questions or comments? Yes.
I came in a little late, so I might have missed this, but was Carl Bogner, does he specialize in, his paintings were from the 1830s, but did he take a special interest in Lewis and Clark, or were his paintings just applicable to their journals?
He did not take a special interest in him. He was a German artist. He came to America with Prince Maximilian de Wied, and although the prince was probably aware, and probably Bodmer were aware of Lewis and Clark, they had no artists with them. And their journals probably weren't widely disseminated. I don't think they were printed until 10 or more years later. And so I don't think that he had Lewis and Clark in mind. And Carl Bodmer went back to Europe, France and Germany, and where he took about 10 years to complete these beautiful paintings that are a treasure now Most of these originals were kept in a German castle, and about 50 years ago, the Northern Gas Company paid millions of dollars to bring all of his original artwork of the Upper Missouri country to the Joslin Art Museum in Omaha, Nebraska. So if you're an art person like I am, be sure to go to the Joslin Art Museum to see original Carl Bodmer pictures. So a sad note, after he did all these pictures for the Prince Maximilian, he had to still make a living, so he did other pictures too. He did some wildlife and some others. He didn't make much money from his paintings from later life. He considered himself a failure. And it's really, really sad, because when you go into the 20th century and you come to America to see what he had done, see these originals, he was absolutely one of the finest recorders of Western native culture and the terrain on the Missouri River. And it's kind of sad that he never lived to see the adulation and the honor that we bestow upon him now.
So did he look around the Southwest and that sort of thing? Pretty much in the Missouri.
There were, in the American West, well into past the middle of the 1800s, the rivers were a main corridor, and if you traveled by land, which they did do, like the rendezvous system, they had carts that they took overland. One reason was to steer away from Blackfoot country, because they were very warlike and did not appreciate the incursion of whites. So the rivers were one way to access the terrain. There were two important trails, of course, the Overland Trail to the Oregon Territory in the 1840s, and then the split that went to the California goldfields in the late 40s and early 50s, and then the Santa Fe Trail. When the steamboat era came, the river routes became much more available. So you didn't get the railroads until the 1870s or so. So it was mostly drag your boats and your butts upstream in a river, or come over in wagons or carts overland, or become later when there's a steamboat, which is a little more commodious than on foot or on a keelboat. And then, of course, the railroads made it even far more easier to go. So that was a snapshot history of the transportation of the West. Just call me a professor. Well, I think I've had enough of your attention, and I appreciate it. If you'd like to come up afterwards, I'd be glad to entertain any questions, and thank you very much.
It's always a pleasure to have Lee here. I learned so much, and I love looking at the different perspectives that these artists bring to stories that are familiar to some of us. I wanted to make a couple of announcements before we leave. Next week for storytelling, we are going to be welcoming Kevin O'Brien. We originally had Dan Hall on our schedule to talk about the archaeology of Traveler's Rest, but he has been whisked off to Hawaii to celebrate a milestone birthday. And I think he really enjoyed the surprise, but we are fortunate that Kevin O'Brien is available to pinch hit. Some of you folks may have heard Kevin speak before. He is also an archaeologist and really has a lot to say about the interactions of the expedition with indigenous people and how the folks, the tribes that they visited really helped along the journey. So I think it's going to be a great presentation next week. And then our last presentation will be on March 14th, and that is going to be by Ramona Holt. And she's going to talk about how this place came to be. Ramona, of course, was part of the folks that really helped us develop the park over the years. So we're really interested to hear her recollections of the first 25 years of Traveler's Rest. I also wanted to note that on March 31st, we're going to officially mark the 25th anniversary with an open house here from 4 to 7 p.m. It's a Tuesday evening. We'll have refreshments from Lolo Peak Brewery and a short presentation about some future plans for the park. There'll also be plenty of time to reminisce about our first 25 years and the work that led to the creation of the park. If you are a member of Travelers Rest Connection, you'll be receiving an invitation in the mail, and we ask that you please RSVP so we can plan for food. But anybody is welcome, not just members. There will be information on our website, and we'll send it out via email as well if you're on our email list. So again, thank you all for today, and we'll see you next week.